Alright guys, today we are in for a treat. We're going to be reviewing a game by, I think non-debatably, the strongest international master to ever walk the face of the earth. I think he was the strongest player to never become the grandmaster. We're going to be looking at a game where Dvoretsky, Mark Dvoretsky that is, beat Vasily Smyslov, a former world champion. So to get into it, this was played in Odessa, Ukraine in 1974. 1974 would make Smyslov about 53 years old, so past his prime arguably, but my rebuttal to that would be, have you seen any of Vishy Anand's recent games? He's still a monster. So Mark Dvoretsky, everybody knows him as the world's best chess trainer. I mean, he trained Kasparov, he trained many greats in history, and I read his School of Chess Excellence books. He has a tactics one, a strategic one, and an endgame one, of course. And then he has Dvoretsky's endgame manual, which is basically, the way I view it is like Silman's 0 to 2200, Jacob Agard's 2200 to 2400, and then Dvoretsky is 2400 to Alien. That's going to be the top rating. I don't think anybody can fully understand that book. But yeah, he was a legend. He stopped playing professional chess and just started training professional people, and they went from master to grandmaster in no time. I mean, he was really something special. So sorry for the long intro, but I promise you this game will not disappoint. And it just shows his understanding of the game. And let's get into it. So Smyslov and Dvoretsky, they play into a Spanish. We get an exchange variation, takes with the d-pawn, castles, and queen to e7. So queen e7 is an older move. What does it do? Well, it guards e5. Now a rook can go to d8 in the future. Sometimes the queen comes to c5. But why it's not optimal is because it blocks in the dark squared bishop. So, you can never play a move that has all benefits. Sometimes there's going to be bad, or all times there's going to be bad things and good things around a move. You have to just weigh the benefits, pros and cons. d4, striking in the center, I think that is the right choice because the queen is in front of the king at the end of the day, and black's king is lagging behind in the center of the board. So are we going to take with the queen, or are we going to take with the knight? Well, we're going to take with the queen. Why? Not so much to defend this guy, because you might say, oh, well, he doesn't want to lose the e-pawn. However, my argument would be rook to e1 would just win the queen. So queen takes. Why take with the queen? And this is a nice thing you see in some openings whose names escape me. But anytime you... Philidor, that's the one I was thinking of. Anytime you remove the queenside knight, the queen actually stands very well on d4. In fact, it pins the bishop on f8 to guarding g7. That's like a nice aspect of it. It also makes it faster to connect your rooks. So that is also good. Okay, bishop to g4 and bishop f4. I was hyped when I saw bishop to f4 because, it's weird. Pawn structure is everything in chess, but in the olden days, you never, ever doubled your pawns. That is, unless you're Dvoretsky. You never really doubled your pawns because they just hammered pawn structure and the importance of it. And it is very important. But engines nowadays, if you see top-level chess, they do this stuff all the time. Go king h1, and then they checkmate you on the g-file. So, chess is too position-specific, but bishop f4... I would say this move being played in 1974 is very, very impressive versus this move being played in 2024. Does that make sense? But, okay, he damages the pawn structure, Smyslov does, and now we have doubled f-pawns. Well, at least regarding e4, right? He's not castling kingside, so I don't know if the open g-file matters much, but how does black exactly pry open the king? It looks kind of hard to make this king weak. So let's see how this develops. Okay, white's rooks are finally connected. This bishop still stands awkward. That's why I don't really like the queen on e7. I mean, in the Grand Prix, when I put it on e2, I fianchetto the bishop. This just looks awkward to me. It looks like black is lagging behind a little bit too much. Okay, knight h5 hitting the bishop, so the bishop slides back to g3. Now, what to do? Amazingly enough, if we got knight takes g3, what do you think the best move is? If you said h takes g3, you're intuitively very good at chess. because what this does is it doesn't allow, you can imagine a queen trade, you can imagine the bishop coming out. It doesn't allow the bishop any room. So again, compromising the structure makes the bishop worse than fixing your own structure and having openings to your king. So we get rook to d8, gaining a tempo on the queen. The queen slides back to e3, knight takes, and the same applies. H takes. And it's very hard to make this structure look bad. In fact, it's still helping the structure because rather than these double isolated pawns, now they're just doubled pawns. Maybe we can use the H file in the future. Many possibilities. This is chess at the end of the day. Okay, we get the queens staring at each other. We get the rooks staring at each other. Black takes the queen. White does not take the queen. White trades rooks first, gives a check, gains development, better places his pieces, and then we enter this endgame. So what is going on? What is this Tetris piece, literally Tetris piece of pawns? Is it good? Is it bad? Well, I would argue it's actually pretty good. You see, if we get something like bishop c5, you'd get king f2 guarding the e pawn, and everything is safe. And behind that, when these pawns trudge up the board, you can imagine the undoubling of them, obviously not with the bishop on c5. I'm kind of just imagining something in my mind. But you can get them undoubled. They help trot forward, right? When they're connected, it's a lot better when they're disconnected. And these pawns are connected. This is one pawn island. This is two pawn islands. This is one pawn island. This is two pawn islands. So both sides have two pawn islands. Okay, we got g6. So he's going to elect to possibly bring it over to the king side. But now e5. Look at the color composition, right? He's putting his pawns on dark squares to disallow Black's bishop from having a ton of vision, right? If they were all on light squares, the pawns can't get targeted, but the bishop sees the whole board. If they're all on dark squares, the bishop can target all of them, but it also cuts off the vision. And it's going to be hard for the bishop to target the base of the pawn chains, right? And if the base of the pawn chains can't be targeted, then the color complex would assume that the benefit would stem from the dark squares, because if they can't attack the base, then in reality, you're just negating the vision of that dark squared piece. So amazing stuff. And this also got me thinking, you know what I'm not a fan of? When people are like, oh, if you're under 1500, you can't look at positional chess or don't look at these endgames. I mean, to me, that's just blasphemy. I mean, I think any rating can look at a backwards bishop move or a backwards knight move or a color complex structure or a pawn structure in general, because it's super important. And I think they can unlock a realm in their mind, or at least in hindsight, hindsight is 2020, when they do become stronger, it's going to feel more natural to them because they've seen it before. So I elect that any rating can look at positional chess. I think they can look at backwards moves, rotation moves, and I think it can greatly benefit their chess. Maybe that's just me. Bishop to g7, aiming at the e5 pawn, and now pawn to f4. You see, this bishop can never attack e3, it can never attack g3. I guess if it does attack e3, king f2 just solves that problem. So we get f6. Okay, now the bishop has some vision, and pawn to e4, trying to cut off the vision again. We get pawn h5, and I mean, Dvoretsky was a beast at the endgame, so he does go king g2. This basically just stops any annoyance of the move pawn h4 because you guard this pawn. For example, you play e5, you kick out the bishop, and then you improve your knight, right? That's like a clearance rotation. You rotate your knight over. Now, if we get takes, that's not so scary. If we get pawn up, you just actually go king h2 and then knight g5. That pawn is an isolated, blockaded pawn by the king. It will be won, and white will have good winning chances. So king g2 is a good move. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so we get bishop takes knight, and I think to the untrained eye, if you look at this position, maybe you would think black is better because his doubled pawns are connected and white's doubled pawns are isolated and disconnected. And if you just look at the pawn structure, you would think black's pawn structure is better. But let's talk about it. These four pawns can easily be stopped by these three pawns. I don't think that's debatable. I don't think that's super hard to see. Vice versa, these three pawns are greatly going to overpower these two pawns because our king can become very active. So since our king is active, the pawn side majority matters more. If you look at the position, black's king can never cross the d file. So how is he gonna put up, fair game on the king side to stop our pawns? He's not, right? We get pawn to b5, but I think the move I want to look at is rook to d8. How do you face this move? Well, you could take, but I would argue that doesn't really help your position, right? May as well go rook to d3 and trade on your own terms, right? His king could still never cross the d file, and if he brought his rook to the d file to bring his king over to the king side, then I would say he would trade. Now you undouble your pawns, you fix your pawn structure. Here he's going to run over to the king side, but as are we. And you see it's just very hard for him to do anything. White will win this 10 times out of 10 if you don't blunder. So the rook trade doesn't work. So what does black have going for them? Okay, he strikes with b5, but we get our e-pawn up the board, and that is a quick pawn, especially since the king, again, can't cross the d file. Pawn to b4, one would think white would be happy to undouble his pawns, and though that still works, he plays the best move, that is king to h4. He's like, go ahead, take my pawn. You're up a pawn. Look at this. Tripled pawns, that cannot be good. And who's going to stop this guy? Nobody. So again, it's about activity. It's not about piece count in the endgame. This is a beautiful rook endgame. I was happy I chose this game, or I found this game, rather. We get king to g5, rook to e6, guarding the pawn not to lose it. King to h6, and Smyslov resigned. Why would you do this? Why would you resign? Well, this rook is trapped, and this king can't guard the rook. So in essence, let's say he goes like, well, I guess he can't even go there because he loses this guy. Let's say I don't know what he does. Let's say he takes a pawn, right? The threat is king to g7, and believe it or not, if king f7, this rook is trapped. So you might say, okay, well, I mean, I'm just going to go c5 and create some room for my rook. And I would be like, okay, that is fair. But then who's going to stop this guy? No one's going to stop this guy. I mean, look how amazing it is when you cut off a king on the irrelevant part of the board. So Dvoretsky was a beast. I think I'm going to do a video off of his endgame books, some of those, some of maybe his strategic, tactical. But this was just a flawless game. I mean, he played it at, I think, 96, 97% accuracy. It looked like he was worse, but he was winning. That is the beauty of the game. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Have you guys heard of Dvoretsky? Have you guys seen any of his games? Those are two very different questions, I believe. As always, thank you for your time. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.